Hi, Shanosuke, Professor of Design at Southern Oregon University. This is your first ground plan, or an introduction to drafting. This is a pretty old PowerPoint that I've been using for years, but it seems to be pretty useful. So I'm going to continue to offer it as a PDF, just a hard copy of this that you can refer to easily. But I'm doing a video version of it as well, just narrating it like I would if I were giving it as a lecture in class. So we're going to take a look at the way that you were to sit down and draw your very first drafting, your very first ground plan. Before we jump into the actual steps, I want to talk about line weights for a moment. And line weights are important in making sure that we can clearly distinguish objects on your drawing. And you really only have to worry about 3 for a simple drawing like a ground plan. If you think about the heaviest line, that's probably going to be your softest lead. So if you have an HB lead in your pencil, maybe a 2H, something like that, depending on how hard you press. That is going to be the lines that outline your theater walls, the section cut of your theater walls, permanent parts of your theater. You can kind of think about it as things that are going to be there after your set is struck, are going to get nice, heavy, bold lines. And you probably want to draw those last so you're not smearing your paper as you're working on your drawing. The most comfortable pencil you have, your 2H or maybe your 4H, depending on how hard you press, is going to want to be that second rank line. Those are the middleweight lines that are for all of the real objects on your stage. That's going to be most of the things that you're putting down in the drawing. That's walls and platforms and props and all the sort of things. Even lettering probably is going to use that middle rank line. And then things that aren't real, that are just drafting conventions, like a center line. We're not actually going to build a center line. A center line is just a place that we measure from. It's the middle point of our proscenium arch, or the middle point of our theater, right? So that's just a way to help us figure out where something is on stage. It's not actually something that's going to be constructed in the same way that the plaster line overhead or the swing of a door, those kind of things. There's a lot of lines that we'll put on a drawing that aren't actual real objects. They're just there to help us understand, or there to give us some kind of datum point to measure from. And those are all going to get the lightest line. So that's your 6H or maybe a 4H pencil that you're going to use to put some very crisp, sharp, but faint lines down on your drawing. And you really want to get into the habit of making sure that all of the kind of objects that should be getting a particular line weight have the same kind of line weight. So all of the real objects on your set should all have basically the same line weight. If some of your theater walls are really thick and heavy and some of your theater walls are barely visible, that's not good. They should all be the same basic line weight for each of your 3 different ranks. And once you've got that down, you can keep an eye on the quality of your lines as well. So very first step here, and there are videos of me actually doing this, recording myself doing these first couple of steps if you want to watch those as well. First thing we're going to do is take the drawing of our theater, the blank drawing of, if it's the generic theater or some other theater, you're going to use your T-square or your parallel ruler to get it nicely centered on your drawing table, tape it down, and then you're going to put over a piece of tracing paper, or if it's your final draft, you're going to put a piece of vellum over on top of that, again, making sure that it's all nicely aligned. And then you're going to start working on the steps of drawing the project. Now, if you can see through to the border on your paper or the theater outline, the next slide here, you don't need to do these first couple of steps if you can clearly see through it. But it's always not a bad idea to kind of lightly draw in a border and the theater walls before you get going. You don't want to put them in as the big heavy lines that they're going to want to be when you're all done, because you're just going to be smearing it with your hands as you're drawing. But we do want to have a border about a ½ inch from the edge of the paper. Notice too that new things are red in this slideshow here, so it's kind of hard to see on this line because it's so fine, but there is a red line that's just inset from the black line here that's meant to be the edge of our paper. So you just want to draw a nice sharp border all the way around. And borders are not just to be pretty, they also show the person looking at your drawing, if it's a copy, that they have the whole drawing. So it actually has an actual purpose. Now this ½ inch can be variable depending how small the piece of paper is. If it's a little tiny prop drawing on an 8x10 or whatever, you can make that border a little skinnier, but on a big piece of drafting, a good ½ inch is a decent size to work with. Now we want to lightly sketch in the theater walls. That's not a bad idea, even if you can see through. Maybe you have to pick up and move, so it's not a bad idea to maybe do the corners. You can come in and just do some L's on where the corners need to go, or put in the center line and the plaster line right away, so that if you do have to pick up your paper and move it, then you can realign it back on top of the theater nicely. So you don't necessarily have to draw the whole theater in at this step, but you certainly want to be able to see where the walls are, because you don't want to be designing scenery that is bigger than your theater. So they're going to be third rank lines when we're done, but for right now you can either just put a few little tick marks, a few little orientation marks in there, or lightly sketch in the whole theater. It's kind of up to you. Then we're going to add the center line and the center line symbol. So a center line is a long, short line. So the short part should be maybe 1/4 of an inch, and the long part should be a good inch or so. I mean, it needs to be a nice difference. It doesn't really matter exactly what the spacing is. I'm not going to come in with a ruler and measure them, although they should be all the same. If you have, your long lines at the top of your center line are 3 inches long, and then they're like 1/2 inch down at the other end, that's not good. They want to be the same spacing, as long as you can kind of eyeball it and see, yep, that's a nice clear center line going right down the center. Now, back when I used to use this as a projection on a wall, on a screen, I took this little center line symbol and I just made it a little bit bigger, and I moved it over here and put this blue ring around it. But people have been confused by this over the years to mean that you have to draw this on your plan. No, all you're doing is this little red interlocking C and L symbol. It should be off the bottom of the apron if possible. If there's room for it down over there, you can put it on your stage if there's no room, but it's better to have it down here. But this blue right here is just simply to kind of enlarge, show what this C and L interlocking is, and that's the symbol for center line. So don't draw this over here, just draw the red C and L. Of course, it's going to be pencil lead when you draw it, not red. See, just like that. Now the plaster line, I tend to not do plaster lines all the time, but they can be very useful to have a nice little 0, 0 origin point. And then the symbol is the P and the L. I mean, I should clarify, I draw the dashed line in, but I don't put the P and the L in there, because it's pretty self-evident in a situation like this that that interlocking P and L is not necessarily required for you to understand what that is. But a plaster line is not the same long short. It is an even dash, because what it's actually showing us is that there is something overhead, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Then you're going to go ahead and add in your set walls. So these set walls here are simply just the outline of whatever you decide, how your room needs to be. And that's just you sitting down with a scale ruler and a calculator and figuring out, well, if this wall is 6 foot long, and then I can turn it this way 30 degrees, and I can make it be 10 foot long. And this is the point where you're kind of sketching. And that's why you want to do this on some tracing paper or some scrap paper, where you can erase and make mistakes and make just different decisions and move things around before you do your final version. So that's all this is. Now there's different ways to draw walls. I prefer a wall that is actually 2 parallel lines about 4 inches in whatever scale you're in apart, because that's about the thickness of a studio flat, of a Hollywood style flat, when we use the 1x material on their ends there. Now if you use Broadway flats, you can make them a little skinnier, or it's also perfectly acceptable just to trace the inside edge of the lines. But I like to draw the actual thickness of the walls. It just makes it a little bit easier to see. And then it also helps me and the TDs understand how are these walls going to fit together. Oh, there's going to be a little bird mouth right there. And we can't just put 2 stock flats together here, because this wall, we're going to have to cut this little miter in here. So this is going to have to be a custom built wall. One of these 2 here can't just be stock flats, because they'd actually be a little opening right there if those were just 2 stock flats put next to each other. So that's why I do it that way, but it's up to you on how you want to draw those. Now we're going to add doors and windows. So I've got a couple of doors in the back of my room here. I've got a couple of windows in the back of my room. I've got a window over here, and I've got a doorway with a shutter in it, an actual door swinging into the room here, and I've got just an archway. So let's take a look at those a little bit more closely and see what's going on. So this is the plan view, how it's going to appear in the ground plan down below over here. And this is what it would look like in an elevation view, what it's going to actually look like upright. So if you just have a gap in the wall, so you've got 2 flats and there's nothing above them, then you simply draw it like this. You just stop one flat and leave a blank area and start the next flat where it is. So that's exactly all you need to do. But if there's an archway above it, like a proscenium arch, you're going to use this little dashed line right over here. This is showing us that there is more wall overhead then that's over the 6-foot height of the actor. So we use a big 6-foot cutting plane. It kind of goes right through the middle of the set, 6 foot off of the stage floor, right? Kind of resting on the actor's head. That's where we cut through it. Anything that is below 6 feet is going to be drawn as a solid, and anything above 6 feet is going to be drawn as a dashed line like this one is right here. So this is how you would draw an archway with no door in it. Then if you add a door in it, all you're thinking about is, well, which way does the door swing? So if the door is like this, here are the hinges on this side, on the right side, and then it swings toward me, that means that the hinge is going to have to be on this side of the wall, on the side that we're looking at, and the door is going to swing into the room. And then you're just going to use a quarter of a circle template here to draw this little arrow, and it has the same exact dash. It looks just like the archway. The only difference is that we're adding this little door. And think about where this rectangle here connects with the wall, because it wants to be where the hinge is, and then that's how we do a door. And windows are pretty simple. You're probably drawing in a 1/4-inch scale ground plan, which is awfully small. So things like there's these little the little wood dividers, the muntins here that hold up the sash, the panes of glass in your window. You can indicate those on the plan view, but it's awfully hard to draw that in 1/4-inch scale because they're probably going to be pretty tiny. It's going to be a little dot of your pencil, so it's hardly worth it in that small of a scale. But the reason why the archway is different, the window and the archway are solid lines here for the window, is that there is wall below the window. So yes, there's wall above, just like there is in the archway, but it's not a dashed line because there's also wall down below. So an actor can't walk through here. If it was a French window, we'd draw it like a door. But since this is a normal window, the actor can't walk through this window. This is a solid line right here. And then in 1/4-inch scale, the best you're going to do is just put another line between the two walls that is going to show the plane of the window in there. That's about all you're going to do. So this little dot right there, that's what this is. This is just that window, the mullions in the window being carried down onto the drawing. Probably not worth it in a 1/4-inch drawing, but you might see that in other symbols and wonder, well, what is that there for? Well, that's what it is. It's the vertical part that we're cutting through with our section cutting plane. So now we're just going to add set furniture here. So we're going to add our chairs and tables and rugs and those sorts of things. Now they want to be on top of the plaster line and the center line want to be on top of everything that you're adding on. So you don't want to erase the center line and the plaster line. You want to put those on top. And then like right now, this little circle right here, that needs a label. I'm assuming that this is probably a stool and a desk. I'm guessing that definitely needs a label. Now this down here is not quite so bad, and this is pretty clear what this is. These are chairs, that's a table, right? So we want to add labels to things. Let me just jump to that slide. And we want to add labels especially for things that need that clarification. So this stool up here is just a circle. Is it a trash can? Is it a lamp? Is it a hole in the floor? Is it a column? I don't know until I add the label stool on there. Oh, okay, stool and a drafting table. How convenient, right? That makes sense. Now the armchair probably didn't need that label, but it's always better to err on the side of too many labels than too few. You don't want anybody to be confused. But what you don't need to do, right here we can say tea table. And because we've drawn the backs, all this is just a little rounded square with another little rounded rectangle on the back here to show where the back is. But because it's underneath the table like that and it's clearly chairs, then we can say tea table. We don't have to say tea table, chair, chair. Does that make sense? So if it's really obvious what it is, you don't have to, it's better to not put so many labels that it just ends up being a cluttered mess, but you also need to add any labels if it's not sure. So these chairs weren't here and it was just a circle, we'd have to say table or tea table or whatever. Because again, I don't know, is this a bird bath? What is this round circle on here until I add the label? But adding tea table here means that these are obviously chairs, the little fringe and the rug, that kind of thing. So also things about labeling that's important is that we want to use the 90s unless we are using something that is aligned to the object. So if there's an object in here that's going off at an angle, we could put the angle of the text along that angle, but otherwise we want it to be 90 degrees. And it's perfectly okay to overlap an object. If it doesn't fit, we can do this little call out like this and say sideboard like that. Or we can overlap the label, like how bookcase and drafting table and armchair, and in fact most of these. Desk is a short word, so desk fits in there. But if desk didn't, if it was roll top desk or something, then you probably want to put it off to the side and do a little call out like we've done over here. I also like to do this little trick here where you put the label, instead of putting the label in some random spot here, put it on the actual line that makes up the object. So then it becomes, that's rug, clearly indicating that this is the rug. So by overlapping it like a sticker on top of things is a really good way to do that. And of course, your labels and all the drawing that you want to do, the lettering that you want to do on your drafting is going to be in all caps and nice and neat and all the same size, hopefully. Next, we want to label the exits. So here we have off to the garden on one side and off to the kitchen and the front hall. So we want everybody to be on the same page when they're looking at the ground plan. If the lighting designer thinks this is the kitchen and that's the garden and then does all kinds of design choices based on that, and it turns out that, wait, why do they keep on going into the kitchen when they say they're going into the garden? Well, no, that's the way to the garden. Then the lighting designer is going to be pulling out their hair. It's even, you might have lots of doors on a set. Even as a director, you might be needing to remember, which door does this go to? Oh yeah, that's the cellar door. Okay, great. So having these labels on the ground plan are just really useful for everybody to know where entrances and exits go. This is clearly a door. This is clearly an archway. There's clearly enough room to get through here, but we don't know where they are. But maybe you're having a unit set and there's different scenes and different doors are different places and different scenes. That's fine. You don't have to label them if they're going to be multiple places. But in a realistic box set interior like this, where this is always going to be the front hall, go ahead and label them. That's going to really save a lot of confusion. Then we want to think about adding our sightline markers. And all these little sightline markers are, as you'll see these little crosshairs off into a drawing. And we just want to think about, well, how are we seeing the set from our lousiest seats here, the ones that are way off on the ends. Now this next step is really important that you get. All of these colored lines that I'm drawing on here are not something you actually draw. These are just to show you during the PowerPoint here what I'm talking about with sight lines. You're just going to put a ruler or something, a triangle on here, and sight it off of where the head of the audience member sitting in that terrible seat is going to be, and then just kind of look and see, all right, from this seat, they're going to miss a little tiny bit of this desk, probably a little bit over here in this corner. That's not too bad from this angle. But I'm also noticing that, wow, I'm looking right at the prop table over here or the quick change booth. I need some masking in here. This is not good. Same thing is going on in this extreme seat here. I'm looking off into the garden. It's not quite as bad, but it's pretty bad. And then here I'm clearing the proscenium arch right there. And if I don't, and I notice that I can't actually get all the way through there, I'm missing this front hall. Maybe you don't want to stage any important stuff for this poor person here that can't quite see what's happening. So don't have a scene where somebody's coming into the door and stands in the doorway for a minute having a conversation, because there's going to be some people over here who aren't going to be able to see that. Or you decide that you need to redesign your set, move your walls around to accommodate for those bad sight lines. Then what you can do is add masking and drops to accommodate that. So maybe it's so bad over here in the kitchen that we just actually added some more flats to just be a masking flat. And we'll just paint it like a hallway or something like that. And this is going to actually take care of this really bad sightline problem that a bunch of seats over here are going to be able to see right backstage. Over here, it's not so bad. So maybe this is just a little bit of drapery that we've added, a little duvetine or something to cover up this area. Then maybe I'm going to add painted drops in certain places. And these lines can help me know, do I have it far enough away from the window, or is it too far? How wide does the drop need to be? So if this is the sight line through this window, that's plenty. This extra coming a couple of feet over here is fine for being wide enough for anybody looking through this window to not see past the edge of the drop. And then don't forget to add in the legs and the masking that is in your theater. So even if it's the soft goods that are normally in your space, or they're in the generic theater, if you're going to use them, go ahead and draw them on the drawing. Even if it's not a box set, you really want to make the decision. Am I doing some kind of Brechtian stage where I'm looking at the rigging and looking at the wings? Fine, that's a choice. But if that's not what I want, you've got a big, beautiful set, and then this side of the stage is wide open with no masking, then we're looking at the rigging and the prop table, and that may not be what you actually want. So you're going to have to think about, am I bringing in soft goods? Am I designing some kind of masking that's part of the set? Do I have a tab over here? Do I have something that's covering up those sight lines? Now we need to add any kind of offstage units. So here, for example, I'm just sort of guessing that maybe I want this little back alcove to be a wagon, to be two different wagons. So I've got a garden wagon that's going to slide in here in Act 1, oh, excuse me, in Act 2. And then this little alcove, this little drafting table is going to slide out of the way. So this is two different wagons. Now, the dash and line types here are important ways to communicate this. So basically what we're looking at is the Act 1 view of this ground plan. So the garden wagon over here is offstage, and it's in light lines, but it's solid lines because it's actually here on this moment on the stage. Whereas in Act 2, we're going to take this little wagon unit and we're going to push it out of the way over here. This is where it's going to park. This is the empty parking space for this wagon unit, which is right now on stage in Act 2. But the garden wagon is actually here when this wagon is here. These two wagons are actual real things. So this gets a solid line, this gets solid heavy lines because it's part of my onstage scenery, and this gets a fine dash line because not only is it just a symbol there telling us this is where something is going to park, it's not even actually really there. So does that make sense? So that's where you want to think about, where are all these wagons and things going to live off stage? Do I have things that are going to go outside during intermission, whatever, however you are going to handle units, wagons, big prop pieces, all that stuff needs to be thought out as part of your design as well. And then we're going to add a title block and notes. So here is the sample title block, and you can use this one as a starting title block. The style of title block can change as long as it's attached to the lower right-hand corner of your drawing. It can go up vertically on this side. It can go all the way across the bottom. That's fine. Or it can be kind of a traditional one, a little block here in the corner. Those are all fine. And you want these kind of bits of information, the show name, what the drawing is, in this case, ground plan or plan, and then the scale are the most essential ones. You can add design director, date's a good thing to have. Those are all important. And you can also have notes that are important for people to know, like we're going to make sure that we attach the garden drop to the stage floor so that it's nice and taut. Well, we need to know that so we don't actually accidentally fly line set 9 out and tear our beautiful garden drop. So there's a good note to have on there. If it's something about the whole set, that's a good place for notes. And you can also use notes as a way to draw information that you don't want to put, you don't want to take up a bunch of room on your drawing. You can put a little call out that says see note 3, for example. See note 3, this is the window that has the broken pane or whatever. And you can put that information off to the side that's too big to go actually on your drawing. So good things about notes. And then we're going to want to add platform heights. And there's only one little one on here. This is all on the stage floor, +0. Well, this is a little 7-inch step onto this little wagon back here. And so you see it says +7 inches. And platform heights are described in inches. So it's +14, not 1 foot 2 inches. Every other kind of dimension is like this. It's a foot dash inches. Even 1 foot 0 inches is how we would write a foot. But for this, it's cumulative inches. How high is something off of the stage floor? And the reason why we need to know this is it's important for directors to think about blocking. Oh, is that high enough so that I can see over the heads of the people in front of them? The lighting designers and sound designers obviously want to know how high people are. If, 7 inches is not much of a step up, but if it was 17 inches or 77 inches, that's a big difference in terms of focusing lights. 7 inches is even a lot for focusing lights. So that's why these height markers are important, but they're only for places that people are going to stand on. So if these walls are 10 feet tall, you don't put plus 120 inches on the wall here because nobody's going to actually be standing on those walls. So those heights would come off of elevations. That's a more complicated kind of drafting that we're not going to have you do right now. So don't worry about how high these walls are. All you want to worry about on your ground plan is how high the platforms are. So here's an example of some other ones here. You can just take a look at this when it's still, but I'll walk you through some of these. So the stage floor is at +0 inches, and it's a good idea to put a little indication of that somewhere on your drawing. Any levels that are below that, like say you're doing a show where you have a narrator or something, so you want the narrator to step down off of the stage floor down 8 inches, that becomes a negative number, so -8 inches. If there were 2 steps here, there was a second 8-inch step, then it would be 0, -8, and -16 all the way down, cumulative inches in the negative direction. You want to put the marker either right in the center of the platform or in some place that makes sense. So here, this is not the center of this platform, this little 16-inch high platform, but it makes a lot more sense to have these lined up like this. So put them in a logical place. You might see this line indicated in some drawings that you need an X on a platform. Well, yes and no. You want to do these X's if you are the technical director and you're trying to work out stock platforms or breakaway platforms in a stage deck. That's not really going to be on your ground plan. You can leave these X's off of your ground plan. The one exception to that would be is if you had a very complicated deck of platforms. There were lots of them at lots of different heights. You could draw these little X's on here with your lightest weight lines, very fine lines, just to make it easier for the person looking at the map of all this stacked platforms to figure out where one contiguous level was. That would be one reason to draw the X, but otherwise you can leave those X's off. Now to draw a ramp, you can do the stage height here, and this is going to be a ramp up to this 24-inch level. There's more information in the drafting part 2 about ramps and the different styles of ramps, so I'll save that for later. On your staircases, though, don't forget that you can use the run over rise, rise over run. 8 over 10 means each tread is 8 inches high and it's 10 inches deep. So 8 over 10, it could be 8 over 12, which would mean that the treads were a foot deep. It could be 7 over 11, that kind of thing. Different combinations of that. So rather than do a height marker for every single step, especially for an escape stair, you could simply do this little symbol to say escape, 8 over 10, and that's going to let me know that that's 8 inches right there, and that's 16 and 24 and so on going up these steps. So if I really wanted to do the math, I could figure it out because I've told you that each step rises 8 inches. All right. So just going to darken the theater walls and add some backstage info like where are the doors to the dressing rooms and so on. That's an important thing to do. If you have fly rails or anything that's going to allow, maybe you can't park the alcove over here because there's some permanent piece of architecture that you forgot to include over here. Oh yeah, that's right. This is where our dimmer racks are and we can't move those, and I need to draw those kinds of things in at this point as well so that you know what's going to get in the way backstage. And then you're done. So that's basically all you need to do to draw a simple, realistic interior ground plan. Now, the second tutorial has all kinds of information for more complicated things, so I really encourage you to watch that. But before you do, I've got a couple more things I want to show you here. One thing that tends to show up for first-year MOTS students, of course, if they're doing the arsenic and old lace set or whatever realistic interior, you tend to need to do stairs and landings. So I want to talk about two-story sets, multiple level sets. So this is what we were talking about a moment ago with here's the stairs. So these are going 8 over 10. That means these are 10 inches. Each of these treads are 10 inches and they're rising 8 inches. Now you don't need to put 8, 16, so on each one of these steps. It doesn't hurt anything, but it's pretty crowded. But it is a really good idea to put things, height markers on landings. It's very likely that an actor is going to come down here and stand on this landing and give a monologue or have some scene. That's a good place to put somebody on an elevation. And they might end up on some random step as well. But landings are just kind of asking for it in terms of an actor standing there and needing to be lit. So major levels like a landing are a really good idea to throw a height marker on, even if you aren't doing it on every single step. Also then, if you're going up to a second floor, you can do this little break line trick. And a break line is just a little zigzag, a little Z. It can be an S too, it can be a curve. But a break line just simply tells people looking at it that this is going to keep on going, but I'm stopping drawing it now. I'm putting this break line right here. The stairs go up a little bit further, but this is the point where I'm hitting 6 foot, and I don't want to go any farther because now I can walk underneath of that. So I'm not going to have the stairs going beyond that. So let's take a look at the next step and see what I'm talking about. So if your set is like this, where you have 2 stacked levels on stage at the same time. So this actress standing underneath this balcony level is still on stage, then you need to draw this in a different way, and you do need 2 different views of it. If it's kind of a wedding cake style here, where there's a wall right here where this woman is standing, and this is off stage back there, you can kind of get away with drawing one view. It's not right, but it's all right. It's okay. But if it's like this, where you've got a door downstairs, this is the door to the basement, and this is the door to the bedroom hallway, hallway here, and they're exactly in the same place vertically, you have to draw them as two separate views. And I'll show you what I mean here. So here is the main ground plan where we're going to draw the whole set. So I've got the piano and I've got the dining table and I've got everything else down over here. On this ground level is where the sideboard and the cellar door is. You'll also notice there's a post right here. That's the post that's supporting the balcony up above, but it goes all the way down to the stage floor. So an actor on the ground level can come over here and lean against this or bump into this. We need to be aware that this is down on the stage floor level. Even though it goes all the way up to the second floor, it goes all the way down to the stage floor. So it gets a solid line just like any of our set walls. And the sideboard is downstairs here, so I'm going to draw that on this level. So now you can see you can go up the stairs and you're going to keep on going, but at a certain point here, you're going to be above somebody down here in front of the sideboard. So an actor on the stairs up here would be standing directly above an actor standing on the ground floor right here. So that's why we put that break line there at the 6 foot height. So then at some other point here, just to clarify that, here's everything I just said with labels on it. So this is the dashed line for the landing overhang. That's the post. And these are items that are on the first level. Then we need to draw some other part of our drawing. Maybe you've got room on your ground plan, you can put it off in a corner somewhere, or if you have to, you can draw it on a separate plate. But you do want to put a little box around something and say upstairs landing plan. Just give it its own little title and a scale. It's probably going to be the same scale as your ground plan, but it doesn't have to be. And then we're going to see, here's where we broke off the stairs going up. We're picking up our stairs again. Now the stairs are going down to that other level. Here's that break line at the 6 foot mark, and we keep on going up until we get to plus 96. So here we are 8 feet over the stage floor. So we're not worrying about the sideboard that's down here. We're not worrying about the things that are on the downstairs level because we're now on a new floor. But up here we have a hall door directly above the cellar door. There's a plant upstairs and a sconce, another door over here that goes off to the bedrooms. And this is that handrail there that supports our balcony. This is all stuff on the second floor. So we're drawing that on a second plate of just second floor things. We're not worrying about first floor things anymore. We're just drawing this as a second plate. So you just need to set that off as a separate part of your drawing. And last but not least, I just want to talk about dimension lines quickly. Dimension lines are first rank lines. We typically don't have too many dimension lines on a ground plan. The only time you need to add them on a ground plan is if there's something that's really unusually dimensioned, like you're doing Alice in Wonderland and you have a door and the door is only 1 foot wide and you really want to draw attention to the fact that that door is super skinny. Or something like a passerelle, if you know what a passerelle is. That's like the little catwalk that'll go around the orchestra pit for a musical. A lot of times a passerelle will be built. And it'll be, say, a 4 foot wide kind of ramp that'll curve around the edge of the orchestra pit. Well, everybody's going to want to know how wide that is. The choreographer, the director is going to ask 50 times. People are going to want to know, how wide is the passerelle again? It's 4 foot. Okay, just put that dimension on the drawing. But otherwise, we don't put a lot of dimension lines on drawings. But when you do use dimension lines, there's a lot of ways that you can draw them. Dimension line values can be offset on the line. So this dimension line is 16 foot 9 inches. Now we're not doing platform heights anymore. So we're not doing the cumulative inches. We've now moved on to the other style of drawings, foot-inches. So 16 foot 9 inches is off of the line. Or what I prefer to do is to actually break the line and draw it right on the line. You can stack them a little bit tighter, and then it makes it perfectly clear which dimension line you are looking at. Notice if you zoom into this little corner here, the leader line on a dimension line usually doesn't touch the object. There's usually a little bit of a gap right there to make it clear what is being dimensioned. And then you can dimension to like a center line in this case. So here's this, it's 9 foot 9 inches from the center line to this corner and 10 foot 2 inches from in the other direction to that corner over there. You can also dimension from this corner to the Plaster-line. And with those dimensions here, you know exactly where on stage to put this platform or whatever this is. So with dimension lines, there's some important things that we want to do. So for example, dimension lines can be chained together. So here is a dimension line that is measuring this edge of the platform, and then it keeps on going over here to measure this edge of the platform. Well, they want to be stacked together in a row like that. You don't want to have this one sticking out with a little bit of a jog right there. You want to keep this in a nice tidy row. We also have things called stacked dimensions. So if you look at this little 2 foot 1 inch dimension, it's smaller than the 32 inches, so it's inside there. You wouldn't want this to be out above it, because then its leader lines would have to cut across the other dimension line. You see the exact same thing going on over here with this 31 foot 2 inch dimension. That's the big outer dimension, and there's the 16 foot dimension inside. Same thing is going on here, 50 foot 10 inches on the outside and these smaller dimensions on the inside. You wouldn't want this dimension to be on the outside cutting across the other line. That's not a good thing. So here's a good example again of chain dimensions right in a row, and sometimes you'll run into dimensions that are kind of small. And there's a couple of different things that you can do about that. So in this case here, it's just barely big enough to fit. That 3 foot 1 inch fits, we can squeeze it in there. Well, this one here is 2 foot 1 inch. That's not going to fit inside there. So you can do this little funnel shape thing going on here. It's not one of my favorite ways to do that, but it's okay. If it's a dimension all by itself like this, especially if it's sharing another dimension, you can just set it off to the side. So 2 foot 1 is just offset. It's not going to fit inside here between the leader lines, but it's clear that that's referencing that dimension gap right there. Trouble you run into, though, is when it's in the middle of a chain dimension. So this 2 foot 10 inches is not going to fit, but you can draw a little arrow or a little arrow to a circle or any other kind of way that you want to indicate that this 2 foot 10 inch is going to this gap here. So these are all in a row, but this dimension is just being offset from that gap. The other idea too that we want to make sure that we are trying to do whenever possible is putting the dimensions off of the object. Now the one exception to that is when you are doing an arc dimension. That's okay to draw on objects, but whenever possible, you see how all these dimension lines are not on this weird platform or whatever it is. They're all off on the outside. That's something we should try to do. Can't always do it, but it's usually a good idea to try to do that. And then you also do want to be aware that a diagonal dimension is going to be different than the same dimension if this dimension were, if we were measuring from here to here, that would tell us how far this back edge is away from this corner, but it's not going to tell us that we need 11 foot 6 inches of baseboard trim along here. So a diagonal dimension is different than the same dimension if it were going on the 90s. So just be aware of that. All right, so that's all you need to do to start off your first plan view of a drawing. I would say at this point, go ahead and maybe watch this once or twice more as you're doing your drawing, and then take a look at that more advanced version, drafting part 2, when you get a chance.